The moment Steve Harvey's eyes widened in disbelief, nobody in that Atlanta television studio could have predicted that a simple podium malfunction would become the catalyst for one of the most heartwarming transformations ever witnessed on national television. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and the familiar hum of Studio 33 at Tyler Perry Studios filled the air as the Family Feud crew prepared for what seemed like another routine taping. The bright stage lights cast their usual warm glow over the iconic blue and red podiums, while the audience settled into their seats, eager for the entertainment that had become a staple of American television for decades. Steve Harvey, impeccably dressed in his signature three-piece suit, reviewed his cue cards one final time, his practiced smile ready to greet the two competing families. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, cameras positioned at precise angles to capture every moment of what producers expected would be another successful episode in the show's legendary run. The Johansson family from rural Nebraska stood on the left side of the stage, their nervous energy palpable as they adjusted their matching blue shirts. 5 generations of farmers, they had never been more than 50 miles from their hometown until this moment. Harold Johansson, the family patriarch at 73, stood with the quiet dignity of a man who had worked the same land for over 5 decades. His weathered hands, marked by countless seasons of planting and harvesting, gripped his granddaughter Emma's shoulder for support. Emma, a recent college graduate with dreams as vast as the Nebraska sky, had convinced the family to apply for the show during a particularly difficult harvest season, when medical bills for Harold's wife had mounted beyond their modest means. On the right, the Rodriguez family from East Los Angeles represented a completely different slice of America. Maria Rodriguez, a school principal who had raised 4 children while earning 2 master's degrees, stood proudly beside her family. Her husband Carlos worked double shifts at the local auto plant. Their eldest son Miguel was completing his residency at UCLA Medical Center, and their youngest daughter Sophia dreamed of becoming the first lawyer in their family's history. This was a multi-generational household where 3 languages were spoken fluently, and dreams were pursued with relentless determination, each family member carrying the weight of ancestral hopes on their shoulders. Hey folks, if you're enjoying this behind-the-scenes look at what really happened that day, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment below sharing your favorite Family Feud moment, and don't forget to click that hype button. It really helps the algorithm share these incredible stories with more people who need to hear them. Your support means everything to this channel. As the cameras began rolling, Steve Harvey stepped forward with his characteristic swagger, his deep voice booming across the studio with the confidence of a man who had hosted thousands of episodes. Welcome back to Family Feud, everybody. I'm your host, Steve Harvey, and we've got 2 incredible families here today ready to play for $20,000. The audience erupted in applause, but something felt different in the air that morning. Perhaps it was the way the lighting technician had adjusted the spots to accommodate the unusual spring storm brewing outside. Or maybe it was the palpable tension between hope and desperation that both families carried. But there was an electricity that seemed to charge every molecule in the room. The show's longtime director, Patricia Williams, watched from the control room with the sharp eye of someone who had been crafting television magic for over 2 decades. She had seen countless families come through these doors, each carrying their own stories of struggle and triumph. But something about today's matchup felt particularly poignant. Through her headset, she could hear the quiet conversations happening during commercial breaks, the way Emma Johansson had whispered encouragement to her grandfather, and how Maria Rodriguez had been coaching her shy teenage son about speaking clearly into the microphone. Harold stepped up to the podium for the opening face-off, his boots making a solid sound against the polished studio floor. These were the same boots he had worn to church every Sunday for the past 15 years, polished to a shine that reflected the studio lights like mirrors. His granddaughter Emma squeezed his shoulder reassuringly, her voice barely audible over the studio's ambient noise as she whispered, "Remember what we practiced, Grandpa? Just be yourself." Harold nodded, his calloused fingers finding their grip on the podium's edge as he prepared to face off against Maria Rodriguez, whose own hands trembled slightly with the nervous energy of someone who understood exactly how much this opportunity meant to her family's future. Steve Harvey positioned himself between the 2 contestants, his trademark energy filling the space as he prepared to read the first question. The host's mind briefly wandered to his own childhood, remembering the times his family had gathered around their old television set, watching game shows and dreaming of the day they might have enough money to solve their problems. That perspective had shaped every interaction he had with the families who appeared on his show, understanding that behind every laugh and every answer was a human story worth honoring. "We asked 100 people," Steve began, his voice rising with practiced theatrical flair. "Name something people do when they're nervous." The question hung in the air between Harold and Maria, simple in its wording but complex in its implications. Both contestants understood that controlling the board in this first round could set the tone for their entire appearance, potentially determining whether they would return home with enough money to change their family's circumstances forever. The studio fell into that familiar hush that preceded every face-off, 200 audience members holding their breath as Harold and Maria positioned their hands over the buzzers. The sound engineer adjusted his levels one final time, ensuring that every word, every buzz, every reaction would be captured with crystal clarity for the millions of viewers who would eventually witness this moment from their living rooms across America. What happened next would be replayed on social media millions of times, but the raw emotion of that moment could never be fully captured in a 15-second clip. As Harold leaned forward to hit his buzzer, the entire podium structure suddenly shifted beneath him, its support mechanism failing in a way that sent the heavy wooden lectern tilting at a dangerous angle. The audience gasped collectively, a sound that seemed to echo through the cavernous studio space like a wave crashing against shore. Harold's eyes widened in surprise and fear as he felt the ground literally shifting beneath him, his elderly frame unable to compensate for the unexpected movement. Steve Harvey's reflexes kicked in immediately, his athletic frame moving with surprising grace as he lunged forward to catch Harold before he could fall completely. The two men found themselves face to face in an embrace that was both practical and profound, and for a moment that felt suspended in time, something passed between them that transcended the artificial boundaries of television entertainment. Harold's eyes, clouded with the beginnings of cataracts but sharp with decades of wisdom earned through triumph and loss, met Steve's gaze directly. "Well," Harold said with a chuckle that carried the weight of a lifetime's worth of resilience and humor in the face of adversity, "I guess that answers your question about what people do when they're nervous." His voice carried no embarrassment, no shame, only the kind of grace that comes from someone who had faced far greater challenges than a malfunctioning game show podium, and had learned to find humor, even in moments of potential humiliation. The studio erupted in laughter, but it wasn't the manufactured applause that television producers typically orchestrated through warm-up comedians and strategic crowd direction. This was genuine, spontaneous joy that seemed to bubble up from some deeper well of human connection, the kind of shared experience that reminded everyone present why they had fallen in love with live television in the first place. The sound engineer later described it as the most authentic moment he had captured in 15 years of working on game shows. Steve Harvey, who had seen everything in his decades of entertainment from stand-up comedy clubs to hosting Miss Universe pageants, found himself momentarily speechless, a rarity that his longtime crew members would later describe as almost mystical in its unexpectedness. Here was a man who made his living with words, who could improvise comedy gold from the most mundane survey answers, suddenly struck silent by the simple dignity of an elderly farmer who had turned potential disaster into a moment of grace. As the technical crew rushed to examine the malfunctioning podium, their equipment cases clattering across the studio floor, Steve made a decision that would ripple far beyond that Tuesday morning in Atlanta. Instead of cutting to commercial break or resetting the scene for a retake, he invited both families to gather around in an impromptu circle at center stage. "You know what, folks?" he said, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to envelop the entire studio like a familiar blanket. "Sometimes the best moments happen when everything goes exactly wrong." The cameras continued rolling, capturing something unprecedented in the show's long history. Emma Johansson later described that moment as feeling like time had slowed down, as if the universe had pressed pause to allow something important to unfold naturally. The Rodriguez family, initially concerned about their opponent's potential embarrassment and the competitive disadvantage this might create, found themselves naturally gravitating toward the Johanssons with genuine concern and support that had nothing to do with game strategy. Maria Rodriguez, despite being naturally competitive in every aspect of her life from school board meetings to her children's academic achievements, was the first to reach Harold's side. Her principal's instincts kicked in immediately as she ensured he was truly unharmed, her practiced eye scanning for any signs of injury that adrenaline might be masking. "Are you okay, sir?" she asked with the kind of genuine concern that reminded everyone present that beneath the game show competition were real people with real families who cared about each other's well-being. What the television audience would eventually see was a carefully edited version of events, condensed into the standard show format, with commercial breaks and closing credits. But those present in the studio that day witnessed something far more profound and transformative. As Steve Harvey facilitated an unexpected conversation between the two families, barriers that typically divided people along lines of geography, economics, and cultural background began to dissolve in real time, replaced by recognition of shared humanity and common struggles. Harold spoke about the challenges facing rural America with the authority of someone who had lived through economic booms that brought prosperity to farming communities and devastating droughts that had driven neighbors to bankruptcy and despair. His voice carried the weight of generations of agricultural knowledge, but also the vulnerability of someone watching a way of life slowly disappearing as family farms were absorbed by corporate agriculture, and young people left for opportunities in distant cities. Maria shared stories of her community's struggles with educational funding, her voice passionate as she described the daily battle to provide quality education with insufficient resources. She spoke about the dreams she held for her students' futures, many of whom came from families working multiple jobs just to keep food on the table, and how she had learned to be both educator and social worker, counselor and advocate, in a system that demanded miracles on a shoestring budget. The conversation that followed lasted nearly 25 minutes, though it felt both eternal and instantaneous to those experiencing it. Time seemed to operate differently in that brightly lit studio space, as if the artificial environment of television production had somehow created a pocket where genuine human connection could flourish without the usual constraints of schedules and commercial considerations. Steve Harvey, drawing on his own childhood experiences growing up in a working-class family in Cleveland, found himself sharing stories he had never told on television before. He spoke about his father's work ethic, the man who had held down multiple jobs to keep his family housed and fed, and about the dignity he had learned to find in honest labor regardless of its social status. He talked about the moments of unexpected grace that had shaped his understanding of what it meant to be truly successful. Success measured not just in financial terms, but in the ability to lift others up and create moments of joy in an often difficult world. Hey, my friends. Help me by subscribing to the channel so we can reach 1,000 subscribers, even if you're watching from your TV or computer. Your subscription makes all the difference, and the algorithm will help you see more amazing stories. Leave a like or an emoji in the comments and be part of this growth. As the production crew worked to repair the podium, something remarkable was happening in the space between the cameras and the audience. The Johansson family's youngest member, 8-year-old Tyler, had struck up a conversation with the Rodriguez family's teenager, Carlos, about their shared love of baseball. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, Tyler played in a rural league with only 4 teams where everyone knew each other's families for generations, while Carlos competed in a highly competitive urban environment with scouts regularly attending games. They discovered their passion for the game created an immediate bond that transcended their circumstances completely. Tyler's eyes lit up as he described the makeshift diamond his grandfather had carved out of a pasture behind their farmhouse, complete with bases made from feed sacks filled with sand and a backstop constructed from old chicken wire and fence posts. His small hands moved animatedly as he explained how the entire county would gather for their Sunday afternoon games, bringing picnic baskets and folding chairs, turning baseball into a community celebration that connected neighbors across miles of corn and wheat fields. Carlos listened with genuine fascination, his own experiences suddenly seeming both vastly different and remarkably similar. He told Tyler about the concrete lot where he practiced hitting against a brick wall for hours after school, the sound of the ball echoing between apartment buildings where dozens of families lived in spaces smaller than Tyler's family barn. Yet the dedication was identical, the dreams equally powerful, the love of the game transcending every boundary that might have separated these two young athletes under different circumstances. The technical delay stretched longer than anyone had anticipated, but nobody in the studio seemed to mind. The audience, initially restless about the unexpected pause in filming, found themselves drawn into the organic drama unfolding before them. This wasn't scripted entertainment designed to elicit predictable responses. It was real life happening in real time, messy and beautiful, and utterly authentic in ways that television rarely captured in an era of carefully manufactured reality programming. Steve Harvey, master of timing and audience engagement, recognized that something special was occurring in his studio. His decades of experience in entertainment had taught him to recognize those rare moments when genuine human connection superseded the artificial constructs of show business, when the cameras became invisible and people simply related to each other as fellow human beings sharing the universal experiences of hope, struggle, and the desire for something better. As he watched the two families naturally begin to support and encourage each other, he made another decision that would prove pivotal to everything that followed. Instead of rushing to repair the technical problem and resume the standard game format, he chose to lean into this unexpected moment, understanding that sometimes the most powerful television happened when the script was abandoned entirely in favor of authentic human experience. Emma Johansson found herself in deep conversation with Miguel Rodriguez, the medical resident whose own journey from East Los Angeles to UCLA Medical Center resonated with her recent struggles as a first-generation college graduate. Emma's voice carried a mixture of pride and uncertainty as she described the challenges of being the first in her family to earn a university degree, the weight of expectations from relatives who had sacrificed to support her education, and the difficulty of bridging two worlds that often seemed impossibly far apart. "People back home don't always understand why I needed to leave," Emma confided, her voice barely audible above the ambient studio noise but carrying clearly to Miguel, who nodded with the recognition of someone who had walked a similar path. "They see the degree as rejection of their way of life, but I see it as a way to bring resources back to our community. I want to be able to help families like ours navigate systems that weren't designed with rural people in mind." Miguel's response came from a place of deep understanding, his own memories of being the first in his family to pursue medicine still fresh, despite years of medical training. "The hardest part," he said, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had worked multiple jobs to pay for medical school, while maintaining the academic excellence required to stay enrolled, "is learning to see your success not as abandonment, but as expansion. You're not leaving your family behind. You're building a bridge between worlds." Their conversation was overheard by Harold and Maria, who found themselves comparing notes about the universal challenge of supporting children whose dreams required them to venture into unfamiliar territory. Harold's weathered face softened as he described watching Emma pack for college, knowing she might never return to the farm permanently, but understanding that her education represented the family's investment in a different kind of future. "We've worked the same land for 4 generations, Harold explained to Maria, his voice carrying both pride and melancholy. "But Emma, she's got ideas about sustainable farming practices and rural economic development that could change everything. Sometimes you have to let your children become the people you couldn't be yourself." Maria nodded with the deep understanding of an educator who had watched countless students navigate similar transitions. "That's exactly what I try to tell parents at our school," she replied, her principal's perspective offering validation to Harold's instincts. "Education isn't about leaving your values behind. It's about gaining tools to pursue those values more effectively in a changing world." The studio's atmosphere had transformed completely from its original game show energy into something that felt more like a community gathering or family reunion. Audience members found themselves wiping away tears as they witnessed these genuine exchanges, many recognizing their own family struggles reflected in the conversations happening on stage. Sofia Rodriguez, the aspiring lawyer, sat cross-legged on the studio floor beside Tyler Johansson, both children completely absorbed in a discussion about justice and fairness that would have impressed philosophy professors. Sofia's dreams of becoming an attorney stemmed from watching her parents navigate complex bureaucratic systems without adequate legal representation, while Tyler's sense of right and wrong had been shaped by watching his grandfather's quiet leadership in community disputes. "My mom says lawyers are supposed to help people who can't help themselves," Sofia explained with the serious tone of a child who had already witnessed too much injustice for her years. "But I want to be the kind of lawyer who helps whole communities, not just people who can afford to pay." Tyler considered this carefully, his 8-year-old wisdom surprising the adults who overheard. My grandpa says the most important thing is to treat everyone fair, whether they're rich or poor, whether you like them or not. Maybe being a lawyer is like being a grandpa for a whole bunch of people you don't even know yet. The technical crew had long since completed their repair of the podium, but nobody seemed eager to interrupt what was happening in the studio. The head of production, watching from the control room, made the unprecedented decision to continue rolling cameras, understanding that they were documenting something extraordinary that could never be replicated or reproduced under normal circumstances. Steve Harvey moved between the two families like a graceful conductor, orchestrating a complex symphony, his natural charisma enhanced by genuine emotion as he facilitated conversations that revealed the deep humanity underlying what could have been a simple competitive television appearance. His questions weren't designed to elicit funny answers for audience entertainment. Instead, they invited people to share their authentic stories and connect across the artificial barriers that normally separated contestants from each other. "You know," Steve said, addressing the studio audience directly, "we've been doing this show for years, asking families to compete against each other for money. But what I'm seeing today reminds me that we're all really on the same team. We're all just trying to take care of the people we love and build something better for the next generation." The audience responded with sustained applause that felt different from typical game show enthusiasm. This was appreciation for something deeper, recognition of a truth that transcended entertainment value and touched on the fundamental connections that bind communities together, regardless of geographic or cultural differences. Carlos Rodriguez Sr., the auto plant worker whose calloused hands told stories of decades spent building vehicles that carried American families safely down highways he might never travel himself, found common ground with Harold Johansson in their shared understanding of honest labor and the dignity that came from work that served others. Both men had spent their lives supporting their families through physical effort that often went unrecognized by society at large. "People don't understand how much pride there is in building something with your hands," Carlos reflected, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never missed a day of work in 23 years of employment. "Whether you're growing food or building cars, you're contributing something real to the world. You're making things that matter." Harold's response came from the deep well of agricultural wisdom that had sustained his family through decades of uncertain weather and volatile markets. "The soil doesn't care about your education level or your bank account," he said with quiet conviction. "It only responds to honest work and respect for natural processes. There's something humbling about depending on forces beyond your control, but also something strengthening about learning to work with them instead of against them." Their conversation was observed by their wives, who had been watching from the audience but found themselves drawn onto the stage by the magnetic pull of authentic human connection. Dorothy Johansson, Harold's wife of 51 years, and Carmen Rodriguez, Carlos's partner in marriage and parenting for 24 years, discovered their own commonalities in the universal experience of raising children while managing household economies that required careful attention to every dollar spent. Dorothy's gentle voice carried stories of raising 5 children on a farm, where money was always tight but love was abundant, where creativity and resourcefulness were essential skills for survival. "You learn to make everything count," she explained to Carmen with the wisdom of someone who had stretched countless family budgets through lean seasons. "Hand-me-down clothes, homegrown vegetables, entertainment that comes from being together rather than buying things. It's not always easy, but it teaches children what really matters." Carmen nodded with the recognition of shared experience, her own memories of raising 4 children on Carlos's factory wages while pursuing her education creating an immediate bond with Dorothy. "The hardest part is helping your children understand that having less money doesn't mean having less value," she reflected. "We had to teach them that their worth came from their character and their efforts, not from what they could afford to buy." As the extended conversation continued, something profound was happening not just between the two families, but throughout the entire studio. Crew members found themselves sharing their own stories during what should have been a technical break. The cameramen, sound engineers, lighting technicians, and production assistants who normally remained invisible behind their equipment began opening up about their own family experiences and cultural backgrounds. Janet Williams, the head camera operator who had been filming game shows for 15 years, later described that day as the moment she remembered why she had fallen in love with television production in the first place. You get used to thinking of people as content, she reflected weeks later. But watching those families connect reminded me that every person who steps onto our set is carrying a lifetime of experiences and dreams. It changed how I approach my work. The sound engineer, Marcus Thompson, found himself adjusting his equipment to capture conversations he knew would never make it into the final broadcast, but felt compelled to preserve anyway. There were moments of such genuine emotion, he explained to colleagues afterward. Laughter that came from real joy, tears that came from recognition and hope. It was the kind of audio that reminds you why you got into this business. Steve Harvey, drawing on his years of experience as a stand-up comedian who had learned to read audiences with supernatural accuracy, recognized that the energy in the studio had shifted into something unprecedented. The artificial boundaries between performer and audience, between competitors and supporters, had dissolved completely. Everyone present had become part of a shared experience that transcended the original game show format entirely. "You know what, folks?" Steve announced to everyone present, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to embrace the entire studio population. "I think we need to forget about the game for a minute and just appreciate what we're witnessing here. This is what America looks like when we stop focusing on what divides us and start celebrating what connects us." The families gathered closer together, no longer positioned as opponents, but as collaborators in something larger than competition for prize money. The children sat together in a circle, sharing stories and dreams that revealed the universal hopes that transcend every demographic boundary. The adults found themselves planning ways to stay connected after the show, exchanging contact information and discussing potential visits that would allow their families to maintain the relationships that had formed so unexpectedly. Emma Johansson and Miguel Rodriguez discovered that their shared experience as first-generation college graduates had created a bond that could support both of them as they navigated the ongoing challenges of bridging different worlds. They exchanged information about scholarship programs and mentorship opportunities that could help other young people from similar backgrounds pursue their educational dreams without feeling forced to choose between family loyalty and personal growth. The technical crew had begun discussing how to edit this unprecedented footage into something that could be broadcast while preserving the authentic emotion that had made it so powerful. The producers recognized that they had captured something extraordinary, but they also understood that conventional game show formatting might not be adequate to convey the full impact of what had occurred in their studio. As the extended interaction continued, both families began discussing the real challenges they faced beyond the game show appearance. The Johanssons spoke openly about the medical bills that had motivated their application to Family Feud, while the Rodriguez family shared their concerns about financing Sophia's college education and supporting Miguel through the remainder of his medical residency. What emerged from these conversations was not just sympathy, but practical support and resource sharing. Maria Rodriguez's experience as a school principal had given her extensive knowledge about scholarship opportunities and educational funding that could benefit Emma's younger siblings. Harold's connections in rural Nebraska included farmers who were experimenting with sustainable practices that Miguel was studying as part of his research into rural healthcare delivery. The studio had become a space where different segments of American society were discovering their interconnectedness, rather than focusing on their differences. Geographic distance, economic circumstances, cultural backgrounds, and educational levels had stopped being barriers to understanding and started being sources of mutual enrichment and learning. Steve Harvey found himself thinking about his own family's journey from Cleveland's working-class neighborhoods to television studios in Atlanta, recognizing that both the Johanssons and the Rodriguez families were pursuing their own versions of the American dream with the same determination and hope that had motivated his own career. The game show format suddenly seemed less important than creating space for these authentic connections to flourish and develop. "You know what, families?" Steve announced with the authority of someone who had just witnessed something that would change his own perspective permanently. "We're going to play this game, and somebody's going to win that money. But what I want everyone to remember is that we're all winning something today that's worth more than any prize we could give away. We're winning the chance to see each other as family instead of strangers." The audience erupted in the kind of sustained applause that recognized something truly significant had occurred. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was a demonstration of human possibility, a reminder that connection and understanding could happen anywhere when people approached each other with openness and genuine interest in each other's stories and experiences. As the camera crews prepared to resume official filming of the game show, both families gathered together for what had become an impromptu family photo that would later be shared millions of times across social media platforms. But for those present in the studio that day, the image represented something more profound than viral content. It documented a moment when the artificial divisions that typically separate people had been replaced by recognition of shared humanity and common purpose. The podium had been repaired, the technical issues resolved, and the game could resume. But everyone present understood that something had fundamentally changed in that Atlanta studio, something that would extend far beyond the game show format and continue to influence the lives of everyone who had participated in this unexpected moment of authentic human connection. Hey, my friends, help me by subscribing to the channel so we can reach 1,000 subscribers, even if you're watching from your TV or computer. Your subscription makes all the difference, and the algorithm will help you see more amazing stories. Leave a like or an emoji in the comments, and be part of this growth.